A 14-year-old boy collapses on a stranger's porch, bleeding from a knife wound meant to kill him slowly. 3 words escape his lips before he passes out. "Hide my sister." The man on that porch had spent 6 years hiding from his own sins. 6 years believing he deserved nothing but solitude and death. But in that moment, Jasper Mallister made a choice that would change everything. He chose to stand. What happens next will keep you on the edge of your seat until the very last word. This story carries a powerful truth. Redemption is not a reward given to the worthy. It is work, daily work, built through small acts of courage, through choosing love over fear, through standing up when every instinct tells you to run. Sometimes the family you are born with is taken from you, but the family you choose, the family you fight for, that can heal wounds you thought would never close. If you have ever felt unworthy of forgiveness, if you have ever carried guilt that seemed too heavy to bear, this story is for you. Drop a comment telling me where you are listening from today. I love seeing how far these stories travel across the world. Now settle in, get comfortable, and let me take you back to a moonless night in the American West, where a wounded boy's desperate plea set in motion a tale of sacrifice, love, and the true meaning of family. Let us begin. Some men run from their past. Others build walls against it. Jasper Mallister did both. 6 years he had lived alone in this cabin at the edge of nowhere. 6 years of silence broken only by wind through cottonwoods and coyotes singing to the moon. 6 years of penance for sins he could never wash clean, no matter how hard he tried. The night everything changed started like any other. Moonless, cold for September. Jasper sat on his porch with a Winchester rifle across his lap, watching darkness swallow the tree line. He never slept inside anymore. Closed walls made him feel like a man buried alive. Out here, with stars overhead and the smell of pine on the wind, he could almost pretend the nightmares would not find him. They always did. He was 42 years old. Former Union Army intelligence officer. Former interrogator. Former friend to the best man he ever knew. Now he was nothing but a ghost haunting his own life, waiting for death to finally catch up. Then he heard it. Footsteps, stumbling through the brush, dragging. Jasper's hand tightened on the rifle. In 6 years, nobody had approached his cabin at night. Folks in Miller's Creek knew better. They whispered about the one-eyed hermit in the hills, the man who spoke to no one and wanted nothing from the world. The footsteps grew closer, desperate, uneven. A shape emerged from the tree line, small, hunched, moving with the determination of someone who had nowhere else to go. A boy. He could not have been more than 14, though it was hard to tell in the darkness. His clothes were torn and soaked with something dark. His breath came in ragged gasps, each one weaker than the last. The boy made it to the edge of the porch before his legs gave out. He collapsed at Jasper's feet, one hand reaching up to grab the worn leather of his boot. 3 words. That was all he managed before consciousness fled. "Hide my sister." Then nothing. Jasper knelt beside the boy, rifle still in hand. He checked for a pulse. Weak, but present. Then he examined the wound. His stomach turned cold. This was no accident, no fall from a horse or scrape from barbed wire. Someone had taken a blade to this child with surgical precision. A long cut across the shoulder, deep enough to bleed badly but shallow enough to keep him moving. Whoever did this wanted him to suffer, wanted him to run until he dropped. Professional work, the kind Jasper had seen during the war, the kind he had done himself once upon a time. The boy's eyes fluttered open. He grabbed Jasper's collar with surprising strength. "Creek," he gasped. "Big rocks, Ellie. Do not let her draw." Then his grip went slack, and he was gone again. Jasper made a decision in that moment. The kind of decision that changes everything. The kind that separates the men who sleep soundly from the ones who carry ghosts. He bandaged the boy roughly with strips torn from his own shirt, applied pressure to slow the bleeding. Then he grabbed his rifle and moved into the night. The creek was a 1/4 mile through cottonwood forest. Jasper moved fast but quiet. the way he had learned in the war, the way a man moved when noise meant death. He found the boulder formation easy enough. 3 massive stones clustered together near a bend in the creek, worn smooth by centuries of water. In the gap between 2 of them, barely visible in the darkness, he saw a flash of pale fabric. A child. She was wedged deep into the rocks, small as a shadow. Dark hair tangled with leaves and dirt. A ragged doll clutched against her chest, button eyes staring at nothing. She could not have been more than 9 years old. Jasper crouched down, making himself small, making himself less threatening. The girl watched him with eyes that had seen too much, eyes that understood too much for someone her age. She did not scream, did not cry, did not run. She just watched him, waiting. "Eleanor," Jasper said, guessing at her name from what the boy had gasped. "Your brother sent me. I am taking you somewhere safe." Nothing. Not even a blink. Then he noticed what she held in her other hand. A charcoal stick, and pressed against the rock beside her, a torn piece of cloth covered in drawings. In the darkness, Jasper could not make out the details, but something about those images made his blood run cold. "Come on, little one," he extended his hand. "Let us get you warm." For a long moment, she did not move. She studied his face like she was memorizing every line and scar, like she was committing him to some internal record that would never fade. Then slowly, carefully, she reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were ice cold, trembling, but she held on tight. Jasper felt something crack open in his chest, something he had kept locked away for years, something that felt dangerously like hope. He lifted her in his arms and turned back toward the cabin. That was when he saw the torchlight. 6 of them, maybe more. Moving through the trees from the east, spreading out in a search pattern. Professional, organized, not a posse of angry farmers. These were hunters, and they were close. Jasper ran. He had not run like this since Georgia. Not since the night he left Thomas Weston bleeding beneath an oak tree and carried intelligence that would save 300 lives to Union command. Not since the night that destroyed him. The girl made no sound. She clung to him like a shadow, her small hands twisted in his shirt, her face pressed against his shoulder. The ragged doll bounced against his back with every stride. Behind them, voices shouted through the darkness. "Find the girl." She saw. She saw. Jasper burst through the tree line and onto his property. The cabin loomed ahead, warm light spilling from the windows where he had left a lamp burning. The boy was still on the porch, pale and unconscious. He had maybe 2 minutes before those men reached them. 2 minutes to make another choice. The same kind of choice he had made 6 years ago. Back then, he had chosen his duty over his friend. He had chosen the mission over the man, and he had been dying slowly ever since. This time would be different. Jasper carried the girl inside and set her beside her brother. Her small hand found his immediately, gripping tight even in sleep. "Stay here," Jasper said. "Stay quiet. Do not come outside no matter what you hear." She looked up at him with those knowing eyes. Then she nodded once. Jasper grabbed his rifle and walked back onto the porch. The torches were closer now. He could see the riders emerging from the tree line. 5 of them with a 6th hanging back. Their horses were lathered and breathing hard, pushed to exhaustion by men who did not care about anything except catching their prey. The man in front dismounted with aristocratic grace, fine clothes that had no place on a frontier ranch, soft hands that had never held a plow or swung a hammer, the kind of man who paid others to do his killing. Jasper had known men like this during the war. Officers who ordered massacres and went home to dinner parties. Generals who signed death warrants between courses of roast beef and fine wine. This man was different, though. This man scared him. And Jasper Mallister was not easily scared. "Good evening," the man said. His voice was pleasant, almost friendly. That made it worse. Beautiful night, would you not say? Jasper kept his rifle ready but not raised. Not yet. Can I help you? I certainly hope so. The man stepped closer. Behind him, his riders spread out, flanking positions, covering angles. Professional. Military. We are looking for some children. A boy and a girl. Runaways, you understand. Caused quite a stir back in town. Ain't seen no children. No. The man tilted his head. Peculiar. Their trail led straight to your door. Trails can lie. One of the riders, a wiry man with a scar down his face, spat into the dirt. He is lying, Mr. Crane. I can smell it on him. Crane. The name meant nothing to Jasper, but the way the man held himself, the way his eyes glittered with cold intelligence, that meant everything. Now, let us not be hasty. Crane raised a hand, silencing his man. He turned back to Jasper with a smile that never reached his eyes. I am a reasonable man, a businessman. I understand that good people sometimes make questionable choices. Get to the point. Very well. The pleasantness dropped from Crane's voice like a mask falling away. Those children's father owed me money, a substantial debt. When he refused to pay, consequences were administered. Unfortunately, the children witnessed those consequences. You understand my predicament. I understand you killed a man in front of his kids. I did what was necessary. Crane's eyes glittered in the torchlight. Progress demands sacrifice. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The wind picked up, carrying dust and the smell of pine and something else. Something that smelled like blood and smoke and all the memories Jasper had tried to bury. Then Crane spoke again, and his words hit Jasper like a bullet. You were Union Army intelligence during the war. Sergeant Jasper Mallister. I know all about you. You know how to make people disappear. So do I. How did this man know? How did he know any of it? Hand over the children, Crane continued, and you can return to your quiet life. Refuse, and I will burn this place to the ground with you inside it. Jasper looked at this man, this monster in gentleman's clothing, this killer who spoke of murder like it was a business transaction. Then he thought about the children behind him, the boy with his desperate courage and his terrible wound, the girl with her knowing eyes and her silent watchfulness. He thought about Thomas Weston dying under a Georgia oak, about the choice he had made that night, about all the years since, living with the weight of that choice. Get off my land, Jasper said. Crane's expression flickered. You are making a fatal mistake, old man. Would not be my first. Crane studied him for a long moment. Then he wheeled his horse around. You have until dawn to reconsider. After that he paused. Well, you know what comes after. The riders melted back into the darkness. Torchlight faded. Hoofbeats grew distant and then vanished entirely. Jasper stood on the porch, rifle in hand, heart pounding. He had until dawn. Maybe 6 hours. Not enough time to run. Not with a wounded boy and a traumatized girl. Not enough time to find allies, not when Crane's men had already reached Miller's Creek. But maybe, just maybe, enough time to figure out why a child's drawings were worth killing for. He went back inside. The boy was still unconscious, his breathing shallow but steady. The girl sat beside him, one hand holding his, the other clutching her ragged doll. In her lap, spread out like evidence at a trial, were her drawings. Jasper picked up the first one and felt his blood turn to ice. It was a man's face, Crane's face, perfect in every detail, down to the cold intelligence in his eyes and the slight sneer at the corner of his mouth. But that was not what made Jasper's hands shake. On the man's inner wrist, drawn with the precision of a photograph, was a tattoo. A snake, coiled in a circle, eating its own tail. Jasper had seen that symbol before, during the war, on men who whispered about the old ways and the new order to come. Men who wore Confederate gray but answered to something darker. The Copperhead Society. And this little girl had seen it, had remembered it, had drawn it in perfect detail. Now Jasper understood why Crane wanted her dead. She was not just a witness, she was a living photograph. Subscribe to this channel and comment where you are listening from. Let me see how far this story travels. Dawn came slow and bloody, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. Jasper had not slept. He sat by the window with his rifle, watching the tree line, waiting for the attack that would surely come. The boy woke sometime after midnight. His name was Samuel, Sam for short. 14 years old, though the pain in his eyes made him look older. He had sat up despite Jasper's protests, insisted on knowing everything, demanded to understand why his world had burned down around him. Jasper told him what he could, told him about Crane and his men, told him about the deadline that was coming with the sunrise. He did not tell him about the drawings, not yet. The girl, Eleanor, never slept at all. She sat in the corner with her charcoal and her scraps of cloth, drawing and drawing and drawing, faces, symbols, scenes of violence that no child should be able to render with such terrible accuracy. "She's been like that since Ma died," Sam said, his voice cracking. 6 months ago. Fever took her. Ellie was right there when it happened. "She watched your mother die," Sam nodded. "Ain't said a word since. Not to me, not to nobody. Doc Pearson said it was shock. Said she might come out of it someday, said she might not." Jasper looked at the girl, at her small hands moving with mechanical precision, at the images taking shape under her fingers. "She sees everything," he said quietly. "Remembers everything." Sam's jaw tightened. "That's why Crane wants her dead, ain't it? Because she saw what he did to Pa? That's part of it. What's the other part?" Before Jasper could answer, the girl looked up. She set down her charcoal and picked up one of her finished drawings, crossed the room in silence, pressed it into Jasper's hands. It was another face. But not Crane this time. A young man in Union uniform. Handsome. Smiling. With eyes that held equal measures of kindness and mischief. Jasper's heart stopped. Thomas Weston, his best friend. The man he had left to die. He stared at the drawing, his hands trembling. How? How could she know his face? The girl pointed at Jasper, then at the drawing. Then she made a gesture with her hands, 2 figures standing side by side, brothers in arms. Sam was watching with confusion. "Who is that?" "Someone I knew. A long time ago." Jasper's voice sounded strange in his own ears. "Someone I lost." Before the conversation could continue, Jasper heard hoofbeats approaching. He was at the window in a heartbeat, rifle raised. 5 riders came out of the morning mist. Crane was not among them, but the scarred man from last night led the group, and his expression said he had not come to talk. "Get down," Jasper barked at the children. "Away from the windows. Now!" Sam grabbed his sister and pulled her to the floor. The girl went without protest, but her eyes never left Jasper. Watching, recording, remembering. Jasper had built this cabin for defense. Thick log walls that would stop most bullets. Small windows that were easy to cover. A root cellar beneath the floorboards that led to a tunnel opening 50 yards away, hidden in a ravine. He had built it for exactly this kind of moment. He just never expected the moment to come. The scarred man stopped his horse at the edge of the property. "Mr. Crane gave you until dawn," he called out. "Dawn's here. Time's up." Jasper did not respond. He sighted down the rifle barrel, calculating distances and angles. 4 rounds in the Winchester, the revolver on his hip with 6 more, against 5 men on horseback in open terrain. Not good odds, but not impossible either. "Here's how this works," the scarred man continued. "You send out the children, we ride away. Everybody lives. You don't?" He shrugged. "We burn you out and take them anyway." Sam's voice came from behind Jasper, thin but defiant. "Don't you dare. Don't you let them take Ellie. Quiet, boy. We can fight." Sam was crawling toward him, ignoring his wound. Pa kept a shotgun under the floorboards. I know how to use it. Jasper looked at this child, this wounded, terrified, impossibly brave child who had already lost everything and was still ready to fight. Your pa's shotgun won't be much use, he said, but there's something else that might be. What? That tunnel I was telling you about. It comes out in a ravine about 50 yards east. You take your sister through there. You run for Miller's Creek. You find someone trustworthy and you tell them everything. I ain't running. Sam's eyes blazed. I'm done running. Pa told me to run. Pa told me to hide. And now Pa's dead. Your pa died so you could live, Jasper said quietly. That ain't something to be ashamed of. It feels like it. I know. Jasper's throat tightened. Believe me, son. I know. Outside, the scarred man was growing impatient. He made a gesture to his companions. Two of them dismounted and started spreading out, moving toward flanking positions. Time was running out. Listen to me, Jasper said, urgent now. I'm going to give you a chance to escape, but you have to take it. You have to take your sister and run. Find the sheriff in Miller's Creek. Tell him about Crane. Tell him about the Copperhead Society. The what? Sam. The boy looked up at him. Just run. There was a long moment of silence. Then Sam nodded once, grabbed his sister's hand, moved toward the trapdoor that led to the cellar. Mr. Mallister, Jasper looked back. Thank you for everything. Then they were gone. The trapdoor closed behind them. Jasper heard their footsteps echoing through the tunnel, growing fainter with each passing second. He turned back to the window. 3 men were advancing on foot now. The scarred man and one other remained mounted, providing cover. Professional tactics. Military training. Jasper had spent 4 years fighting men like these. He knew their strategies, knew their weaknesses. He also knew that he was likely going to die in the next few minutes. But maybe, just maybe, he could buy those children enough time. The first attacker reached the well at the center of the yard. Jasper put a bullet through his kneecap. The man went down screaming, clutching his leg. The second attacker broke left, trying to reach the blind spot on the cabin's north side. Jasper tracked him through the window, led him by 2 feet, and fired. The bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. 2 down, 3 remaining, and only 2 bullets left in the rifle. The scarred man shouted orders. The remaining foot soldier retreated to cover behind the horse trough. The mounted rider circled wide, looking for an angle. Jasper shifted to a different window. The cabin's interior was filling with gun smoke, making his eye water. He could hear the children's footsteps fading through the tunnel. Almost there, almost safe. Then the world exploded. The front door burst inward. The scarred man came through with a shotgun, firing before he even cleared the threshold. Jasper threw himself sideways. Buckshot tore through the space where his head had been a heartbeat before. He hit the floor rolling, came up with his revolver, and fired 3 shots in rapid succession. The first went wide. The second caught the scarred man in the gut. The third punched through his chest. The man dropped. His shotgun clattered to the floor. Jasper did not have time to celebrate. The remaining attackers were at the windows now, firing blind, trying to suppress him, while someone else moved around back, where the tunnel opened into the ravine. No. Jasper burst through the cabin's rear door, ignoring the bullets that cracked past his head. He rounded the corner at a dead sprint, boots pounding on packed earth. The ravine was 20 yards away. He could see the hidden opening covered with brush and deadfall, and he could see the horseman bearing down on it. Jasper raised his revolver and fired. 2 shots, both missed. His hand was shaking. He had not been in a real fight in 6 years, and his body was remembering all the ways combat could break a man. The horseman wheeled around, saw Jasper, and raised his rifle. 2 men, 2 guns, 20 yards of open ground between them. Jasper had 1 bullet left. The horseman fired first. The bullet caught Jasper in the left thigh, spinning him around, sending him crashing to the ground. Pain exploded through his leg like white-hot fire. But he did not drop his revolver. The horseman rode closer, grinning now, certain of his kill. He brought his rifle up for a finishing shot. Jasper lay in the dirt, bleeding, watching death approach. He thought about Thomas Weston, about the children he was trying to save, about all the chances he had wasted, and all the sins he could never atone for. Then he raised his revolver one last time. His final bullet took the horseman through the throat. The man toppled from his saddle. His horse screamed and bolted. And suddenly, impossibly, there was silence. Jasper lay on his back, staring up at the morning sky. His leg was bleeding badly. His head was spinning. But the children were safe. They had made it through the tunnel. They were running toward Miller's Creek right now, and no one was left to chase them. He had done it. He had saved them. Then he heard the click of a hammer being pulled back. "Mr. Mallister," Victor Crane said. That was quite a performance. Jasper turned his head. Crane stood 10 feet away, a pearl-handled revolver pointed directly at his chest. His fine clothes were dusty from the ride, but his composure was immaculate. His eyes were as cold and dead as a snake's. "You killed 4 of my men," Crane said. "That's going to make the rest of this very expensive. But I am nothing if not adaptable. The children are gone." Jasper's voice was thick with pain. "You won't find them." Crane smiled. "Oh, I think I will. Miller's Creek isn't that big, and everyone there knows the price of defying me." He raised the revolver. "This is going to hurt," he said. "But I want you to know that it's nothing personal, just business." Jasper closed his eyes. So this was how it ended, bleeding in the dirt, killed by a man he barely knew, for reasons he still did not fully understand. "Thomas," he whispered, "I'm sorry. I'm coming to join you." The shot rang out, but Jasper did not die. His eyes flew open. Crane staggered backward, clutching his arm. Blood streamed between his fingers. His revolver lay in the dirt where he had dropped it. Behind him, emerging from the tree line like vengeance-given flesh, stood a woman. Auburn hair escaping a practical braid, green eyes sharp as broken glass, a Colt Navy revolver steady in work-calloused hands. She was beautiful. She was terrifying. And she was aiming directly at Crane's head. "Step away from him," she said. Her voice was ice. "Now." Crane's composure finally cracked, his face twisted with pain and fury. "Do you have any idea who I am?" "I know exactly who you are." The woman advanced, never lowering her weapon. "You're a dead man walking. The only question is whether I pull this trigger now or later." "She shot me," Crane snarled. "This is not over." "Yes, it is." The woman fired twice more. Not at Crane, but at the ground near his feet. He stumbled backward, tripping over his own boots, and crashed into the brush. "Run," the woman said. "Tell your masters what happened here. Tell them Clara Weston is coming for all of you." Crane scrambled to his feet and fled into the trees. A moment later, Jasper heard hoofbeats retreating into the distance. Clara Weston, Thomas's wife, the woman Jasper had widowed. She turned to face him. Her expression was unreadable. Her gun was still in her hand. 6 years. "I've been looking for you," she said. 6 years since my husband died in Georgia. "And you've been hiding here, living like nothing happened." Jasper tried to speak, failed, tried again. "You have every right to shoot me." "I know I do." Clara's eyes were bright with tears she refused to shed. "But first, you're going to tell me the truth. All of it. Every single detail about how Thomas died." She holstered her weapon and knelt beside him. "And then," she said, "we're going to find those children, because they're out there alone and terrified, and I'm not going to let anyone else die because of you." Her hands were surprisingly gentle as she began bandaging his leg. "Can you walk?" "I can try." "Then try. We don't have much time." She helped him to his feet. Pain shot through his leg with every movement, but he gritted his teeth and bore it. He had endured worse. He would endure this. Together they moved toward the tree line, toward Miller's Creek, toward whatever hell was waiting for them there. Behind them, Jasper's cabin began to burn. They found the children 2 miles from the cabin, huddled in a dry creek bed with their backs against a cut bank. Sam had his father's knife in one hand and a rock in the other. Ellie crouched behind him, silent as always, her ragdoll clutched to her chest. When Sam saw Jasper limping out of the brush with a strange woman beside him, he nearly threw the rock before recognition dawned. "Mr. Mallister," Sam's voice cracked with relief. "You're alive." "Barely." Jasper lowered himself to the ground, his wounded leg screaming in protest. "Thanks to her." Sam's eyes shifted to Clara. "Who are you? Someone who wants to kill Mr. Mallister?" Clara's tone was matter-of-fact. "But I'm postponing." Sam blinked. "Get in line." Crane was here first. Despite everything, despite the pain and the fear and the memory of gunfire still ringing in his ears, Jasper felt something that might have been a smile tug at the corner of his mouth. This boy had spirit. No wonder he had survived this long. Ellie emerged from behind her brother. She studied Clara with those knowing eyes, taking in every detail. Then she reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a folded piece of cloth. Another drawing. She pressed it into Clara's hands and stepped back, watching. Clara unfolded the cloth, her breath caught. "How?" she whispered. "How do you know this face?" Jasper leaned over to look. His heart clenched. It was Thomas Weston again. But this time the portrait was different. Thomas sat beneath a tree, his back against the trunk, one hand pressed to a wound in his hip. Blood stained his uniform. But he was smiling, and beside him, barely visible in the corner of the drawing, was a folded letter. Clara's hands trembled. "What is this?" Jasper did not have an answer. He looked at Ellie, searching for some explanation, but the girl just watched them with calm, knowing eyes. "She sees things," Sam said quietly. "Things she shouldn't be able to see. Things that haven't happened yet, or things that happened a long time ago. We don't know how, she just does." "That's impossible," Clara said. "A lot of impossible things have happened in the last 12 hours. Jasper's voice was weary. "At this point, I've stopped being surprised." Clara looked at the drawing again, at Thomas's peaceful expression, at the letter beside him. "He wasn't afraid," she said softly. "When he died, he wasn't afraid." "No." Jasper closed his eyes. "He was the bravest man I ever knew, right up to the end." Silence fell over the group. The wind whispered through the grass. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out. Then Clara folded the drawing carefully and tucked it into her pocket. "We need to move," she said. "Crane will be back with reinforcements. We need to find somewhere safe before nightfall." "Miller's Creek," Sam said. "There's folks there who might help us. Sheriff Whitmore, he's a good man." Clara and Jasper exchanged glances. "What?" Sam demanded. "What's wrong?" Jasper sighed. "Crane's men got to the town before us. We don't know who's still alive, don't know who we can trust." Sam's face went pale. "Sheriff Whitmore? We don't know. But we're going to find out." They moved through the brush in single file. Jasper leaned heavily on a branch Clara had found for him, his wounded leg leaving a trail of blood that he knew would be easy to follow. Sam walked beside his sister, one hand always within reach of hers. And Clara brought up the rear, her revolver drawn, her eyes scanning the trees. She was a hell of a woman, Jasper realized. Thomas had always said so in his letters and his quiet moments of homesickness. Said she was smarter than him, tougher than him, better than him in every way that mattered. He had not been wrong. They walked in silence for an hour. Then 2. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist, revealing a landscape of rolling hills and scattered pines. In the distance, Jasper could see the smoke from Miller's Creek's chimneys rising into the cloudless sky. "Tell me about him," Clara said suddenly. "About Thomas, about the mission that killed him." Jasper did not answer immediately. He focused on putting one foot in front of the other, on ignoring the fire in his leg, on keeping his breathing steady. "It was Georgia," he said finally. "Summer of '64. We were behind enemy lines, gathering intelligence on Confederate troop movements. Thomas and me, we'd been partners for 3 years by then. Brothers, really. The kind of bond you only forge in war. Go on." "We stumbled onto something bigger than troop movements. Jasper's voice was flat, emotionless. A network of officers who were planning for after the war, gathering resources, building connections, laying groundwork for a new power structure in the South. The Copperhead Society. Jasper stopped walking, turned to face her. "How do you know that name?" Clara reached into her coat and pulled out a worn piece of paper. Thomas's handwriting, faded but legible. "He wrote to me about it," she said. 3 days before he died. Said he'd found something rotten in the army. Something that would survive the war. He drew this. She showed him the sketch. A snake coiled in a circle, eating its own tail. The same symbol Ellie had drawn on Crane's wrist. "We were compromised," Jasper said. "Someone in our unit was feeding information to the Copperheads. They set up an ambush. Thomas took a bullet in the hip. Couldn't move." Clara's jaw tightened. "And you left him." "I had a choice." Jasper's voice cracked. "Stay and die with him, or run and deliver the intelligence that could save 1,000 lives." "So you ran?" "Yes." "And Thomas died?" "Yes." They stood there in the midday sun, two people bound together by grief and guilt, and the ghost of a man they had both loved. "He told me to go," Jasper said quietly. "Those were his last words to me. Go, Jasper. Finish the mission. Don't let them win." Clara was silent for a long moment. "Did you?" she asked. "Did you finish the mission?" "I delivered the intelligence. 300 men in the 14th Infantry lived because of what we found. But the Copperhead Society," Jasper shook his head, "we never exposed them. They buried it. Buried everything. And now they're here 6 years later, building their empire in the West." Clara looked at the drawing in her hands, at Thomas's smiling face, at the letter beside him. "He forgave you," she said softly. "Didn't he?" Jasper couldn't speak, couldn't trust his voice. "That's what this drawing means. Ellie sees things, knows things. She's showing us that Thomas wasn't angry when he died. He was at peace." Clara's eyes met his. "He chose to stay, chose to give you a chance to live, and he wanted you to know it was okay. I don't deserve forgiveness." "No, you don't." Clara tucked the drawing back into her pocket. "But Thomas gave it anyway. That was who he was." She started walking again. After a moment, Jasper followed. "I'm not going to forgive you," Clara said over her shoulder. "I can't. That's not my right. Only Thomas could forgive you, and he's gone. I understand. But I can choose to stop hating you." Her voice was steady, controlled. "Because if I don't, the hatred will kill me before any bullet could. And Thomas wouldn't have wanted that." They walked in silence after that. But something had shifted between them. Some invisible wall had cracked, letting in the smallest sliver of light. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't trust. But it was something. And for now, that would have to be enough. They reached the outskirts of Miller's Creek as the sun began to sink toward the western hills. The town looked peaceful from a distance. Quiet streets, orderly buildings, the steeple of a white church rising above the rooftops. But Jasper knew better than to trust appearances. "Wait here," he said to the others. "Let me scout ahead." Clara shook her head. "I'm coming with you. Someone needs to stay with the children." She hesitated, looked at Sam and Ellie, then back at Jasper. "Fine. But if you're not back in 30 minutes, I'm coming in after you." "Fair enough." Jasper limped toward the town, using the tree line for cover. His leg was throbbing, the wound starting to seep through Clara's makeshift bandage. He needed a doctor, needed rest, needed about a dozen things he wasn't going to get. He circled around to the north side of town, where a livery stable sat at the end of a dirt road. The building looked abandoned. No horses in the paddock, no smoke from the chimney. Jasper slipped through the back door and into the shadows. The stable was empty except for old hay and older memories. But it was defensible. Thick walls, multiple exits, good sight lines through the gaps in the boards. It would do. He was about to head back for the others when he heard movement outside, footsteps, low voices. Jasper pressed himself against the wall and peered through a crack in the boards. Two of Crane's men were walking down the main street, rifles slung over their shoulders. They moved with the casual arrogance of conquerors, and the townspeople they passed shrank away from them like rabbits from wolves. Then Jasper saw what hung from the old oak tree in the center of town. A body. A man in a sheriff's star. Sheriff Whitmore. And pinned to his chest a sign written in blood-red letters. Anyone who shelters them dies like this. Jasper's stomach turned. He had seen atrocities during the war, had committed some himself in the name of duty and survival. But this casual cruelty, this public execution, designed to terrorize an entire community, it was different. This was evil. He slipped back out of the stable and made his way to where the others were waiting. Clara took one look at his face and knew. "How bad?" she asked. "Bad." Jasper's voice was hollow. "Crane's men have the town. Sheriff's dead. Anyone who helps us dies." Sam made a sound like a wounded animal. "Sheriff Whitmore was a good man. He used to give me and Ellie candy when we came to town with Pa." "I know, son. I'm sorry." "What do we do now?" Clara asked. "We can't run forever. The children need food, shelter, medicine. You need a doctor. The stable on the north end of town looks abandoned." Jasper gestured in its direction. "We can hole up there for now. Figure out our next move." "And what is our next move?" Jasper looked at her. At Sam. At little Ellie with her knowing eyes and her terrible drawings. "We expose them," he said. "The Copperhead Society. Crane. All of it. We get evidence and we send it to someone who can't be bought." "How?" Jasper thought about Crane's compound. About the documents and ledgers that must be inside. About the proof that could bring down an empire. "I have an idea," he said, "but you're not going to like it." He was right, she didn't. But by the time he finished explaining, she had agreed anyway. Because what other choice did they have? They moved to the abandoned stable as the last light bled from the sky. Sam helped his sister through the back door while Clara kept watch. Jasper limped in last, collapsing against a pile of old hay, his leg finally giving out. "We rest tonight," he said. "Tomorrow we plan. And then we go into the snake's den, and we burn it to the ground." Clara nodded once. Then she settled into a defensive position by the door, revolver in hand, eyes on the darkness outside. Jasper closed his eyes. For the first time in 6 years, he didn't dream of Thomas Weston dying under a Georgia oak. He dreamed of fire. Morning came gray and cold with a promise of rain in the air. Jasper woke to find Clara still at her post by the door, hollow-eyed but alert. She had not slept. "You should have woken me," he said. "You needed the rest more than I did." She handed him a canteen. "Found this in the back. Still has water." He drank gratefully, then passed it to Sam, who was stirring in the corner. Ellie was already awake, sitting cross-legged on the floor, drawing by the thin light filtering through the boards. "How's the leg?" Clara asked. Jasper looked down. The bandage was soaked through with blood and something that smelled like infection. "Not good. But it'll hold." "It won't. You need a doctor. Can't exactly walk into town and ask for one." Clara's jaw tightened. "No, but I can." "What?" "They don't know my face." She stood, brushing hay from her clothes. "I rode into Miller's Creek 3 days ago, asking questions about you. Nobody paid much attention to another widow looking for answers. And you think you can just stroll in there now? I think I can try." Clara checked her revolver, making sure it was loaded. "There's a doctor on the east side of town. Name's Morrison. I spoke to him when I first arrived. He seemed like a decent man. Crane's men will be watching. Then I'll be careful." Before Jasper could argue further, Sam spoke up. "I'll go with her." "No," Jasper and Clara said simultaneously. Sam's face reddened. "I ain't a child. I can help. I know this town better than both of you." "That's exactly why you need to stay hidden," Jasper said. "Crane's men are looking for you. One glimpse and it's over. Then what am I supposed to do? Just sit here while you all risk your lives?" "Yes." Jasper's voice was firm but not unkind. "That's exactly what you're supposed to do. Protect your sister. Keep her safe. That's the most important job there is." Sam looked at Ellie, at her small form bent over her drawings, at the terrible weight she carried without complaint. "Fine," he said finally. "But if you're not back in 2 hours, I'm coming after you." "Fair enough." Clara headed for the door, then paused. "Mallister." "Yeah?" "If I don't come back," she hesitated, "take care of them. Get them somewhere safe." "You'll come back, but if I don't," Jasper met her eyes, "I'll take care of them, I promise." She nodded once. Then she was gone, slipping through the stable doors and into the gray morning light. The next 2 hours were the longest of Jasper's life. He sat with his back against the wall, rifle across his lap, watching the children. Sam paced like a caged animal, unable to sit still, unable to stop worrying. Ellie just drew, her charcoal moving across cloth in endless patterns. "Tell me about my father," Sam said suddenly. Jasper looked up. "What?" "You knew him. During the war. Thomas Weston. He was your partner." "Your father?" Sam nodded. "Ma's first husband. He died before I was born. She married Pa a year later." Jasper's mind raced, putting pieces together. Clara was Thomas's widow. Sam was from her second marriage, which meant, "You're Thomas Weston's stepson?" "I never knew him." Sam's voice was flat. "But Ma talked about him sometimes. Said he was the bravest man she ever met. Said he died doing something important." She looked at Jasper. "She never told me what." Jasper took a deep breath. "He discovered a conspiracy," he said. "A group of men, former Confederate officers who were planning to take control of the West after the war. They called themselves the Copperhead Society." Sam's eyes widened. "That's who Crane works for?" "That's who Crane is. One of their leaders, if I had to guess. Thomas was going to expose them, but they found out. Set up an ambush. Thomas took a bullet, and You ran." "Yes." Sam was quiet for a moment. "Ma said you were Thomas's best friend. Said you carried him through 100 battles. I did. So why did you run when it mattered most?" Jasper looked at this boy, this child who had lost his father, his mother, everything he had ever known, who was sitting in a dirty stable surrounded by enemies, demanding answers that Jasper had spent 6 years trying to avoid. "Because I was ordered to," he said finally. "Because the intelligence we gathered was too important to lose. Because Thomas told me to go. And you listened?" "I did what I thought was right." Jasper's voice cracked. "I did what a soldier's supposed to do. Follow orders. Complete the mission. Put the greater good above personal loyalty." He paused. "And I've regretted it every day since." Sam stared at him. Then, slowly, something in his expression changed. The anger didn't disappear, but it made room for something else. Understanding, maybe, or at least the beginning of it. "Pa did the same thing," he said quietly. "When Crane's men came for us, he told me to run, to take Ellie and hide. Said he'd hold them off. He was protecting you. He was dying." Sam's voice broke. "And all I could do was run." Jasper reached out and put a hand on the boy's shoulder. "That's all any of us can do sometimes. Run, survive, live to fight another day. It doesn't make you a coward, it makes you human." Sam didn't respond. But he didn't pull away either. In the corner, Ellie had stopped drawing. She was looking at them with those knowing eyes, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Then she went back to her work. And somehow, that simple gesture said more than words ever could. Clara returned an hour later, breathless and blood-spattered. "We need to move," she said. "Now." "What happened?" Jasper was on his feet instantly, ignoring the scream of protest from his wounded leg. "Two of Crane's men recognized me leaving the doctor's." "I had to," she paused. "Handle them." "Handle them how?" Clara held up her blood-stained hands. "How do you think?" Jasper looked at her. At the steel in her eyes. At the woman Thomas Weston had loved and married and left behind. "Did you get the supplies?" She held up a saddlebag. "Medicine, bandages, food. Enough for a few days." And the doctor? He's on our side. She pulled out a folded piece of paper. He gave me this too. Said it might be useful. Jasper unfolded the paper. It was a map. Detailed, hand-drawn, showing a fortified compound about 10 miles north of town. Crane's headquarters. Doc Morrison's been treating some of the workers there, Clara explained. He made the map from memory. Said there's about 20 men stationed at the compound, plus Crane himself. 20 men. Jasper studied the layout, noting guard positions and weak points. That's an army. I know. We can't take on 20 men, not with a wounded leg, 2 children, and limited ammunition. Clara's jaw tightened. Then we need allies. Who? Everyone in Miller's Creek is either dead or too scared to help. Not everyone. Clara reached into her coat and pulled out a brass button. Plain, unremarkable, the kind you might find on any Confederate uniform. The doctor gave me this too, she said. Said a man came to him yesterday, asking about the children. Said the man was one of Crane's, but didn't seem like the others. Seemed, she hesitated, conflicted. Jasper took the button, turned it over in his fingers. You think we can turn one of Crane's men? I think we have to try. Because right now he's the only chance we've got. Sam had been listening to the whole conversation. Now he spoke up. What if it's a trap? It might be, Jasper admitted. But Clara's right. We're outgunned and outmanned. If there's even a chance of getting someone on the inside. He looked at the map again. At the compound that held all of Crane's secrets. We need to find this conflicted man, he said. Find out what he knows. And then we need to figure out a way into that compound. And if we can't? Jasper met Clara's eyes. Then we die trying. The rain started an hour later. A cold, driving rain that soaked through their clothes and turned the ground to mud. They moved through the brush in single file, following a game trail that wound through the hills away from town. Jasper's leg was fire. Every step sent bolts of agony shooting up his spine. But the medicine Clara had brought helped, numbing the worst of the pain, keeping him moving when his body wanted to collapse. Sam carried Ellie on his back when the mud got too deep for her small legs. The girl clung to him in silence, her drawings tucked safely inside his coat, her button eyes staring out at the gray world passing by. They made camp that night in a shallow cave, barely more than an overhang of rock. Jasper built a small fire, just enough to take the edge off the cold, while Clara kept watch. Tell me about Crane, she said suddenly. Everything you know. Jasper fed another branch into the flames. His real name is Marcus Cole, Colonel Marcus Cole, Confederate Army. During the war, he commanded a unit that specialized in... He paused, looking at the children. Special operations. What kind of special operations? The kind that don't get written about in history books. Clara's expression hardened. War crimes? Among other things. Jasper's voice was flat. He was responsible for the massacre at Greenville. Burned an entire village. Men, women, children, anyone suspected of Union sympathies. How did he escape justice? The same way all of them did. Jasper stirred the fire with a stick. He had friends in high places, people who owed him favors, people who needed what he could provide. And now he's building an empire out west. Land, mines, railroads, politicians. Jasper nodded. The Copperhead Society isn't fighting another war. They're buying one. In 20 years, they'll control everything from Texas to California, and no one will know they exist. Until now. Until now. Clara looked at the fire, at the flames dancing in the darkness. Thomas was trying to stop them, she said softly. That's why he died. Yes. And now we're going to finish what he started. Yes. She met his eyes across the fire. Good. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the rain and the crackle of the flames. Then Sam spoke up from his corner of the cave. I know him. Know who? The conflicted man. Sam's voice was hesitant. I think I know who he is. How? When Crane's men came for us, there was one who didn't seem like the others. Younger, scared-looking. He was the one who... Sam touched his shoulder where the wound was still healing. He cut me, but not deep, like he was holding back. You think he let you survive on purpose? I don't know. Maybe. Sam looked at Jasper. His name was Dawson. I heard the others call him that. Dawson. Jasper rolled the name around in his mind. It meant nothing to him. But maybe it would. Get some sleep, he told the children. We move at first light. Sam curled up beside his sister, pulling his coat over both of them for warmth. Within minutes, they were asleep. Clara remained awake, her eyes on the darkness outside the cave. You should rest too, Jasper said. So should you. He almost smiled. Fair point. They sat in silence, watching the rain fall. Two people who had every reason to hate each other, thrown together by circumstance and grief, and the stubborn refusal to let evil win. Jasper, Clara said softly. Yeah? If we don't make it through this, she hesitated. I want you to know something. What? She turned to face him. In the firelight, her eyes were very green, very bright, very alive. I'm glad I found you, she said. Not because I wanted revenge, but because now I understand. Understand what? Why Thomas loved you. She looked back at the fire. You're a good man, Jasper Mallister, no matter what you think of yourself. He didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. But something warm bloomed in his chest, something that felt like hope. And for the first time in 6 years, the weight of his guilt felt just a little bit lighter. They found Dawson 2 days later in the last place Jasper expected. He was waiting for them. The abandoned homestead sat in a small valley surrounded by pines. It had been a prosperous farm once, judging by the bones of the buildings. Now it was just ruins and memories, like so much else in this broken land. Jasper spotted the figure on the porch from 100 yards out. A man sitting alone, no visible weapons, waiting. It's him, Sam whispered. That's Dawson. You're sure? I'd know that face anywhere. Jasper studied the man through narrowed eyes. Young, maybe 35. Weathered face, tired eyes. The kind of man who had seen too much and carried it like a stone around his neck. Stay here, Jasper told the others. I'll approach alone. Like hell you will, Clara said. If it's a trap, no sense in all of us dying, and if it's not, then I'll wave you in. Before Clara could argue further, Jasper stepped out of the tree line and walked toward the homestead. His legs screamed with every step. The medicine was wearing off, and the infection was getting worse. He could feel the heat radiating from the wound, the telltale signs of fever starting to take hold. He didn't have much time. Not for his leg, not for any of it. Dawson watched him approach without moving. When Jasper was 20 feet away, the man finally spoke. I was wondering when you'd find me. How did you know we were coming? Dawson shrugged. I didn't, but I hoped. Jasper stopped, kept his hand near his revolver. Why? Because I'm done. Dawson's voice was hollow. Done with Crane. Done with all of it. You expect me to believe that? I don't expect anything. Dawson looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. I just want out. And you're the only way I'm going to get it. Jasper studied the man, searching for deception. For the telltale signs of a lie, he found only exhaustion. And something else. Something that looked a lot like guilt. You cut the boy, Jasper said. Sam, you're the one who gave him that wound. Yes. Why? Because Crane ordered me to kill him. Dawson's jaw tightened. I cut him shallow instead. Hoped he'd survive long enough to escape. You hoped? He's my brother, Mallister. Dawson's voice cracked. Half-brother. Different fathers. But we share blood. Jasper's world tilted sideways. What did you say? My mother was Helen Thornton. Dawson's eyes were bright with unshed tears. She married Marcus Cole when I was 10. Didn't know what he really was until it was too late. Marcus Cole. Victor Crane, the same man. Sam's father married your mother? After she left my father. Dawson nodded. She took me with her, raised me in Crane's house. But when she tried to leave him, He what? He's holding her prisoner. Dawson's hands clenched into fists. Has been for years. Said if I ever betrayed him, he'd kill her. Jasper's mind raced, rearranging pieces, seeing patterns he had missed before. Sam doesn't know, does he? No. Dawson looked toward the tree line where the others were hidden. His father never told him, never told anyone. Crane made sure of that. Why are you telling me this now? Because Crane killed her anyway. Dawson's voice went flat, dead. Yesterday, slit her throat and sent me her wedding ring. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band, held it up to the light. This is all I have left of her, he said, and now I have nothing left to lose. Jasper was silent for a long moment, processing, deciding. Then he made a choice. Clara, he called out, bring the children. They emerged from the tree line slowly, cautiously. Sam stopped dead when he saw Dawson. That's the man who cut me. I know. Jasper's voice was calm. And he's going to help us now. Help us? Sam's face reddened with fury. He nearly killed me. He saved your life. Jasper looked at the boy. He was ordered to kill you. He cut you shallow instead. That's supposed to make it okay? No, nothing makes it okay. But right now, he's the best chance we have of getting into Crane's compound and exposing the Copperhead Society. Sam glared at Dawson with undisguised hatred. The older man met his gaze without flinching. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Dawson said quietly. I don't deserve it. But I can help you bring down Crane. And that's got to count for something. Clara stepped forward. Her hand rested on her revolver, but she didn't draw. What do you know? Everything. Dawson turned to face her. Patrol routes, guard schedules, where Crane keeps his documents. All of it. Why should we trust you? You shouldn't. But ask yourself this. What do I have to gain by betraying you? Your life, if Crane finds out. My life ended yesterday. Dawson's voice was hollow. When my mother died. All I want now is to see Crane hang. Clara looked at Jasper. He nodded slightly. Tell us everything, she said. Dawson talked for the next hour, described the compound in detail, including weaknesses in the perimeter and blind spots in the patrol routes. Explained where Crane kept his records, the vault-like office building at the heart of the complex. Revealed the location of a secret entrance, a drainage tunnel that led under the walls. By the time he finished, Jasper had a plan. A desperate, dangerous, probably suicidal plan. But it was a plan. We go in tomorrow night, he said. When the moon is darkest. 3 of us. Me, Clara, and Dawson. What about us? Sam demanded. You can't just leave us behind. I can, and I will. Jasper's voice was firm. You stay with Ellie. Keep her safe. That's the most important job there is. But no arguments. This isn't a discussion. Sam opened his mouth to protest again, but before he could speak, Ellie reached out and touched his hand. It was the first time she had initiated contact with her brother since their father's death. Sam looked at her knowing eyes, at the small smile on her face. Fine, he said reluctantly, but you better come back, all of you. We will, Clara said. But even as she spoke, Jasper saw the doubt in her eyes, the knowledge that they might not survive what was coming. He didn't blame her. He felt the same way. That night, after the children were asleep, Jasper found Clara sitting alone at the edge of the camp. She was staring at the stars, her expression unreadable. He sat down beside her, said nothing. waited. "I never got to say goodbye," she said finally. "To Thomas. He went off to war, and I never saw him again. I'm sorry." "Don't be." Clara's voice was distant. "I've had 6 years to make peace with it. 6 years to learn how to live without him. And have you?" "Most days." She turned to look at him. "Some days are harder than others. Like today, like every day since I found out you were alive." Jasper didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. "I hated you for so long," Clara continued, "blamed you for everything. But now that I'm here, now that I see what you've been living with—" "What?" She was quiet for a moment. "I understand," she said softly. "Why Thomas loved you. Why he trusted you with his life. Why he told you to run. He forgave me. He never blamed you to begin with." Clara reached over and took his hand. "And I think it's time I stopped too." Jasper's throat tightened. He looked down at their intertwined fingers, at this woman who had every right to hate him but had chosen a different path. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," he said. "Probably not." She squeezed his hand. "But I'm giving it anyway. Because holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. And I'm tired of dying. Clara, Jasper." She leaned in and kissed him. Soft, brief, a promise of something more. Then she pulled back. "Get some sleep," she said. "Tomorrow's going to be hell." She stood and walked back to the camp. Jasper watched her go. And for the first time in 6 years, he felt something other than guilt. He felt alive. They struck at midnight. The compound loomed ahead, its walls and watchtowers silhouetted against the starless sky. From a distance, it looked like a fortress. Up close, it looked like hell. Jasper counted at least 12 guards on visible patrol, with more probably stationed inside. 20 men, Dawson had said. Maybe more. 3 against 20. Not good odds, but not impossible either. The drainage tunnel was exactly where Dawson had promised, hidden beneath a rusted grate at the base of the northern wall. The grate was locked, but Jasper had dealt with worse. A few minutes with his knife, and they were through. The tunnel was dark and narrow, barely wide enough for a man to crawl through. The smell of sewage and rot filled Jasper's nostrils, making his eyes water. They moved in single file. Dawson first, then Clara, then Jasper bringing up the rear. The only sound was their breathing and the distant drip of water. After what felt like an eternity, Dawson stopped. "Here," he whispered. "This grate leads into the compound. The office building is 50 yards to the east." "Guards?" "2 outside the building. Another 4 on patrol around the perimeter." "Can we avoid them?" "Maybe." Dawson paused. "Or we can take them down one at a time." Jasper looked at Clara. She nodded. "One at a time it is." They emerged into the compound like ghosts. The night was dark, clouds covering the moon, and they moved through the shadows with the ease of people who had spent their lives learning how to be invisible. The first guard never saw them coming. Jasper was on him before he could turn, one hand over his mouth, knife sliding between ribs. The man dropped without a sound. The second guard was trickier. He was alert, nervous, jumping at every noise. Clara took him from behind, her arm around his throat, squeezing until consciousness fled. 2 down, 18 to go. They reached the office building without further incident. The door was locked, but Dawson had a key. "Where did you get that?" Clara whispered. "Stole it from Crane's desk last week. Been planning this for a while." Inside, the building was dark and silent. Rows of file cabinets lined the walls, filled with documents, ledgers, records. The evidence they needed to bring down the Copperhead Society. "Start looking," Jasper said. "We need proof. Names, dates, transactions. Anything that ties Crane to the conspiracy." They split up. Jasper took the left side of the room, Clara the right, Dawson the back. The minutes ticked by as they rifled through drawers and folders, searching for the key to everything. It was Clara who found it. "Jasper." Her voice was tight. You need to see this. He crossed the room to where she stood. In her hands was a leather folder thick with documents. The Copperhead Society. Everything was there. Membership lists spanning 6 territories. Financial records showing millions of dollars in land purchases and political bribes. And a plan, detailed and chilling, for the assassination of the territorial governor. My God, Jasper breathed. There's more. Clara handed him another folder. This one was thinner, but its contents hit Jasper like a punch to the gut. Thomas Weston's face stared up at him from a photograph. Beneath it, a stack of letters in Thomas's handwriting, and a note in Crane's precise script. Threat eliminated. August 1864. He was investigating them, Clara said, her voice breaking. He was getting close. Crane had him killed. Clara nodded. The ambush in Georgia. It wasn't random. It was an execution. Jasper felt the world tilt beneath him. All these years he had blamed himself for Thomas's death, had carried the guilt like a stone around his neck. And now he knew the truth. Thomas had been murdered, and Jasper had been a pawn in the game. We have to go. Dawson's voice cut through the fog. Someone's coming. Jasper stuffed the documents into a saddlebag. They moved toward the door, weapons drawn, hearts pounding. But they were too slow. The door burst open. Light flooded the room, and standing in the doorway, flanked by a dozen armed men, was Victor Crane. Mr. Mallister. Crane's voice was pleasant, almost friendly. I had a feeling you'd come. Jasper raised his revolver. Give me one reason not to kill you. Because if you do, my men will kill everyone you care about, including those children hiding in the hills. Jasper's blood ran cold. You know where they are? I know everything, Mr. Mallister. I've known since the moment that boy stumbled onto your porch. Crane smiled. Did you really think you could hide from me? Clara's gun was trained on Crane's head. Her finger trembled on the trigger. And you, Mrs. Weston. Crane turned to face her. Thomas's widow. How touching that you should be here at the end. Don't say his name. Why not? Crane's eyes glittered with malice. He was a good man, your husband. Brave, honorable, stupid. Just like you. Clara's finger tightened on the trigger. 1 pound of pressure separated Crane from death. But before she could fire, Dawson stepped forward. Brother. Crane's smile faded. Little brother. I was wondering when you would show your true colors. You killed our mother. She was weak, like you. Crane's voice was cold. I did what was necessary. You murdered her. I removed an obstacle. Crane gestured to his men. Just like I'm about to remove all of you. The guards raised their rifles. Jasper saw what was about to happen, saw the future laid out before him in blood and fire. And he made a choice. Dawson, he said quietly. Get them out of here. What? The drainage tunnel. Get Clara out. Get the documents to Denver. Expose these bastards for what they are. What about you? I'll buy you time. Jasper. Clara's voice cracked. You can't. Yes, I can. Jasper looked at her, and for a moment everything else faded away. There was just the two of them, suspended in time, holding on to something that might have been love. Take care of the children. Tell them I'm sorry. Jasper, go. He charged. Gunfire erupted. Jasper felt bullets tear through his shoulder, his side. He kept going. His knife found the throat of the first guard. His fist connected with the face of the second. Behind him, he heard Clara and Dawson running, heard the drainage tunnel grate slam shut, heard the shouts of pursuit. And then he heard nothing at all. Darkness took him. Jasper woke in hell. At least that's what it felt like. Fire in his wounds, chains on his wrists, and the face of Victor Crane looming above him. You're a stubborn man, Mr. Mallister. Crane's voice was thoughtful. I respect that. Even admire it in a way. Jasper spat blood. Go to hell, eventually, but not today. Crane leaned back in his chair. They're gone, by the way. Your friends. The woman, my brother. The documents. All of them. Jasper felt a spark of hope ignite in his chest. But don't celebrate too soon. Crane smiled. I know where the children are hiding. My men will have them within the hour. No. Yes. Crane stood. You see, Mr. Mallister, you didn't really accomplish anything. You just delayed the inevitable. He walked to the door. When I return, we're going to have a long conversation about pain. I trust you remember how those conversations go. After all, you conducted quite a few of them during the war. The door closed. Jasper was alone. He hung from the chains, his body broken, his spirit crushed. But somewhere in the darkness a flame still burned. Clara was out there. Dawson was out there. The documents were in their hands. The truth was going to come out. And that meant everything Jasper had done, everything he had sacrificed, hadn't been for nothing. He closed his eyes and waited for whatever came next. Clara ran until her lungs burned and her legs threatened to give out. Behind her, Dawson kept pace, the saddlebag of documents clutched to his chest like a lifeline. They emerged from the drainage tunnel into a world of chaos. Gunfire echoed in the distance. Torches flickered along the compound walls. Shouts and screams filled the night air. Jasper, Clara gasped. We have to go back for him. He's dead. Dawson's voice was flat. Or will be soon. There's nothing we can do. We can try. And get killed ourselves. Dawson grabbed her arm. He sacrificed himself so we could escape, so we could get these documents to Denver. Are you going to let that sacrifice be for nothing? Clara wanted to argue, wanted to scream, wanted to charge back into that compound and burn it to the ground with Crane inside. But she knew Dawson was right. The children, she said, we have to get to them before Crane's men do. Where are they? A homestead in the valley, 5 miles east. Then let's move. They ran through the darkness, following game trails and dry creek beds, pushing their bodies to the limit. The first light of dawn was breaking over the mountains when they reached the homestead. Sam was waiting on the porch, his father's knife in one hand, a rifle in the other. He lowered the weapons when he saw who was approaching. Mrs. Weston. He looked past her. Where's Mr. Mallister? Clara felt the words catch in her throat. He didn't make it. Dawson said it for her. Crane's men caught us. He stayed behind to buy us time. Sam's face went pale. Dead? We don't know for sure, but he's dead. Sam's voice was hollow. He's dead, and we're alone. Not alone. Clara knelt in front of him. Never alone. We still have each other, and we still have a chance to make this right. How? These documents. She touched the saddlebag. They prove everything. Crane's identity, the Copperhead Society, all of it. We get these to Denver to a territorial judge and Crane goes down. Sam looked at the bag, then at Clara, then at the doorway behind him, where Ellie stood in silence, clutching her rag doll. She's been drawing, he said quietly. All night. Won't stop. Drawing what? Sam stepped aside. Clara moved past him into the homestead. The walls were covered in images, dozens of them. Charcoal on cloth, paper, wood, anything Ellie could find. And every single one showed the same scene. A man hanging from a rope. A crowd gathered around. A sign on his chest that read, Justice. Victor Crane. She sees things, Sam said from behind her. Things that haven't happened yet. Or things that are supposed to happen. Clara stared at the drawings, at the hope they represented. We're going to make this happen, she said. I swear it. They prepared to leave within the hour. Clara packed supplies while Sam helped his sister gather her drawings. Dawson kept watch, his eyes scanning the tree line for any sign of pursuit. They were loading the last of the supplies when Ellie suddenly stopped. She turned toward the trees. Her eyes went wide, her mouth opened in a silent scream. What is it? Sam grabbed his sister's arm. Ellie, what's wrong? But Clara already knew. They're here. Crane's men emerged from the tree line like ghosts. 6 of them, rifles raised, spreading out to surround the homestead. And at their head, Limping but very much alive was Victor Crane. "Mrs. Weston." His voice was pleasant, almost conversational. "You led us quite a chase. But all good things must come to an end." Clara's revolver was in her hand before she could think. She fired twice. Both shots went wide, thrown off by hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Crane didn't even flinch. "Admirable spirit," he said, "but ultimately futile." His men advanced. Clara fired again, emptied her revolver, dropped two of them before the hammer clicked on empty chambers. Then strong arms seized her from behind. The documents were torn from her grasp. And Victor Crane walked toward her with a smile that never reached his eyes. "You've caused me a great deal of trouble, Mrs. Weston." Crane stopped in front of her. "You and your friend Mallister. But trouble can be resolved." "What did you do to him?" Crane's smile widened. "Nothing yet. He's still alive, hanging in my compound, waiting for me to decide his fate. He's alive." Hope surged through Clara's chest. "For now." Crane's eyes glittered. "But that can change, depending on how cooperative you choose to be. What do you want?" "The girl." Crane turned to look at Ellie, who was pressed against her brother, trembling. "She sees things, knows things. She's a liability I can no longer afford." "Over my dead body," Sam snarled. "That can be arranged." Crane nodded to one of his men. "But I'd rather not. Dead children attract attention. Living children can be re-educated." He reached for Ellie, and that's when everything changed. The girl looked up at Crane with those knowing eyes, and for the first time since her mother's death, she spoke. "You're going to die." Her voice was soft, hoarse from months of silence, but the words cut through the night like a knife. Crane froze. "What did you say?" "I saw it." Ellie's voice grew stronger. "In my drawings, a rope around your neck, a crowd watching, a sign that says justice. You're going to die, and everyone's going to know what you did." Crane's composure cracked. For one moment his mask slipped, and Clara saw the fear beneath. Then his face hardened. "Silence her," he ordered. His men moved forward, and that's when Dawson struck. He had been waiting at the edge of the group, unnoticed, forgotten. Now he lunged at the nearest guard, his knife flashing in the dawn light. The man went down with a gurgling cry. Chaos erupted. Clara grabbed Sam and Ellie, pushed them toward the trees. "Run!" she screamed. "Don't stop until you reach Miller's Creek." "What about you? I'll find you." "Go!" Sam hesitated for one heartbeat. Then he grabbed his sister's hand and ran. Clara turned back to the fight. Dawson was down, bleeding from a dozen wounds, but he had taken 3 of Crane's men with him. The remaining 2 were advancing on Clara, rifles raised. And Crane himself was walking toward her, his pearl-handled revolver in his hand. "Enough," he said. "This ends now." Clara had no weapon, no options, no hope. But she had something else. Courage. She charged. Crane fired. The bullet took her in the shoulder, spinning her around, dropping her to her knees. Pain exploded through her body, but she didn't stop. She crawled forward, reached for Crane's leg, grabbed his ankle and pulled. He went down hard. The revolver flew from his grip. And then they were fighting, rolling in the dirt, clawing, biting, struggling for survival. Clara was wounded and exhausted, but she fought with the strength of desperation. She fought for Thomas. She fought for Jasper. She fought for those children running through the trees. Crane was stronger, faster, more experienced. He got his hands around her throat and squeezed. Clara felt the world going dark, felt her lungs screaming for air, felt death reaching for her with cold, patient hands. And then she felt something else, a hand on her shoulder, a voice in her ear. "Let go," Thomas said. "Let go and live." Clara let go. And somewhere in the distance she heard gunfire. Jasper Mallister had crawled through worse places than a drainage tunnel. Not many, but some. The chains in Crane's compound hadn't been designed to hold a man who had spent 4 years escaping Confederate prisons. It had taken time and blood, but he had worked his way free. Now he was running through the dawn, following the sounds of gunfire, praying he wasn't too late. He burst out of the tree line to find chaos, bodies on the ground, blood everywhere. Clara lying motionless in the dirt, Crane's hands around her throat. Jasper didn't think, didn't hesitate, didn't feel the pain in his wounds or the exhaustion in his muscles. He just aimed and fired. The bullet took Crane in the shoulder, the same shoulder where Jasper had been shot. Poetic justice. Crane released Clara and spun to face this new threat. "Mallister!" His voice was a snarl. "How?" "You taught me well during the war." Jasper limped forward, his revolver never wavering. "Turns out your interrogation techniques aren't as effective as you thought." Clara was stirring, gasping for breath. Alive. That was all that mattered. "It's over, Crane." Jasper stopped 10 feet away. "Your men are dead. Your documents are gone. The territorial judge in Denver knows everything by now." Crane's face twisted with rage. "You think that matters? The Copperhead Society is bigger than one man, bigger than documents and judges and laws. We've been building this for decades. One setback won't stop us." "Maybe not." Jasper raised his revolver. "But it'll stop you. You won't kill me." Crane's voice dripped with contempt. "You're too honorable, too weak. You left your best friend to die because you couldn't bear to disobey orders." "You're right." Jasper's voice was calm. "I left Thomas because I thought I was doing my duty, because I believed the mission was more important than one man's life." He stepped closer. "But I've had 6 years to think about that choice. 6 years to realize I was wrong. 6 years to learn that some things are worth more than duty." "Like what?" "Family." Jasper thought of Sam and Ellie, of Clara, of the ragged, broken group that had somehow become his reason for living. "The people you love, the people who love you back." Crane laughed. "Sentiment. It'll get you killed." "Maybe." Jasper met his eyes. "But at least I'll die knowing I did the right thing." Crane moved. He was fast, faster than Jasper expected. His hand came up with a knife, slashing toward Jasper's throat. Jasper twisted aside. The blade caught his cheek, drawing blood. He grabbed Crane's wrist and twisted. The knife clattered to the ground. They grappled. Two old warriors, wounded and exhausted, fighting with everything they had left. Crane was stronger. Jasper was more desperate. Desperation won. Jasper got his hands around Crane's throat. Squeezed. Crane's eyes bulged. His face went red, then purple. His hands clawed at Jasper's arms, drawing blood. But Jasper didn't let go. "Thomas," he whispered. "This is for Thomas." Crane's struggles weakened. "And for everyone else you've murdered. All the innocent people you've destroyed." Crane's arms fell to his sides. "And for me, for the man I used to be before you, ruined my life." The light faded from Crane's eyes. Jasper held on for 10 more seconds, 20, 30, then he let go. Victor Crane, Colonel Marcus Cole, leader of the Copperhead Society, was dead. Jasper knelt in the dirt, gasping for breath. His wounds were screaming, his vision was blurring. He had nothing left, but he had won. Jasper. Clara's voice, weak but alive. He crawled to her side, took her hand. "It's over," he said. "He's dead." "The children?" "Safe. They made it." Clara closed her eyes. Tears streamed down her face. "I thought I lost you," she whispered. "When you stayed behind. I thought, I know." Jasper squeezed her hand. "But I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Promise? Promise." They lay there in the dirt, two broken people holding on to each other. And for the first time in 6 years, Jasper Mallister felt something like peace. The next few hours were a blur. Townspeople arrived from Miller's Creek, drawn by the sounds of gunfire. They found the scene of carnage and immediately set to work, tending the wounded, burying the dead. Sam and Ellie emerged from the trees, dirty and exhausted but alive. Sam ran to his sister's side while Ellie knelt beside Jasper, her small hand touching his cheek. "You came back," she said. Her voice was soft, barely a whisper. "You came back." "I promised." Jasper managed a weak smile. "I don't break promises." Dawson was found among the bodies, barely breathing. The doctor from Miller's Creek, Morrison, worked on him for hours. Against all odds, he survived. And through it all, Clara never left Jasper's side. 2 weeks later, a man from Denver arrived in Miller's Creek. He was a federal marshal, sent by the territorial judge to investigate the claims made in the documents Clara had delivered. He spent 3 days interviewing witnesses, examining evidence, taking statements. On the 4th day, he called a town meeting. "The Copperhead Society is finished," he announced. "Over 30 members have been arrested across 6 territories. Their assets have been seized. Their plans have been destroyed." A cheer went up from the crowd, but the marshal wasn't finished. Victor Crane, also known as Colonel Marcus Cole, was responsible for numerous crimes, including murder, conspiracy, and treason against the United States. His death was justified as self-defense. He looked at Jasper, who stood at the back of the crowd, leaning on a crutch. "Mr. Mallister, on behalf of the territorial government, I want to thank you for your service. Your actions have saved countless lives." Jasper said nothing. He just nodded once. The marshal left the next day. Life in Miller's Creek slowly returned to normal. But for Jasper and his little family, nothing would ever be normal again. And that was just fine with him. Spring came slow to Miller's Creek. The snow melted. The creek rose. The cottonwoods sprouted new leaves. And on the Thornton homestead, rebuilt from ashes, life began again. Jasper stood on the new porch, watching the sunrise paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink. His leg still ached from the wound that would never fully heal. His eye patch was a constant reminder of the past. But for the first time in 6 years, he didn't mind. He had earned these scars. They were proof that he had survived. "Coffee?" Clara appeared beside him, 2 steaming cups in her hands. She was wearing one of his old shirts, her auburn hair loose around her shoulders. The scar on her chest peeked above the collar, a pale ridge of tissue that she never tried to hide. "Thanks." He took the cup. "Sleep well?" "Better than I have in years." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the day begin. Behind them, sounds drifted from inside the house. Sam arguing with Ellie about whose turn it was to feed the horses, the clatter of breakfast dishes, the creak of floorboards under young feet. The sounds of family. "Jasper," Clara said quietly. "Yeah?" "Thank you." "For what?" "For staying." He turned to look at her. At this woman who had come to kill him and ended up saving his life instead. At the second chance he never expected and didn't deserve. "Where else would I go?" he said. She smiled. That small, secret smile that was just for him. "Nowhere," she said. "You're home now." Home. The word felt strange on his tongue. He had not had a home since before the war, had not allowed himself to want one. But now, standing on this porch with this woman, listening to these children, watching the sun rise over the mountains, now he understood what the word meant. Home wasn't a place. It was the people who made you want to come back. The screen door banged open. Sam emerged, Ellie close behind. "Mr. Mallister," Sam said, "Ma wants to know if you're going to town today." It still caught Jasper off guard sometimes hearing Sam call Clara Ma. But 3 months had passed since the battle at the homestead. 3 months of healing and growing, and learning to be a family. Things changed. "Probably," Jasper said. "Need supplies. You want to come?" Sam's face lit up. "Can Ellie come too?" "If she wants." Ellie nodded. She still didn't speak much. The doctor said she probably never would, not the way other children did. But she had her drawings, her gestures, her knowing eyes that saw more than any words could express. And she had her voice when she chose to use it. "Get ready," Clara said. We leave in an hour." Sam whooped and ran back inside. Ellie followed at a slower pace, pausing to give Jasper one of her rare smiles. He watched them go. "They're good kids," he said. "The best." Clara leaned against his shoulder. "You're good with them." "I try. You succeed." Silence fell between them again. But it was a comfortable silence, the kind shared by people who didn't need words to communicate. "Jasper," Clara said finally. "Yeah? I love you." The words hung in the air like a prayer. Jasper turned to face her, looked into those green eyes that had haunted his dreams for months. "I love you too," he said. She kissed him, long and slow and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, she was smiling. "Took you long enough to say it. I was waiting for the right moment." "And this is the right moment?" Jasper looked around. At the house they had built together, at the land they were tending, at the children waiting inside. "Yeah," he said, "I think it is." They went inside to start their day. Behind them, the sun continued to rise. The creek continued to flow, and life, as it always did, continued to go on. Later that morning, they all rode into Miller's Creek together. The town had changed in the months since Crane's death. New families had arrived, new businesses had opened. The shadow that had hung over everything was finally lifting. People waved as they passed, called out greetings, smiled. Jasper still wasn't used to it. For 6 years he had been a hermit, a ghost, a man who wanted nothing more than to be left alone. Now he was part of a community, part of something bigger than himself. It was terrifying and wonderful and absolutely worth it. They stopped at the general store first. Sam ran off to look at the new rifles while Ellie wandered toward the candy jars. Clara went to place their order with the shopkeeper. Jasper stayed outside, watching the street. "Mr. Mallister," he turned. A young man was approaching, hat in hand. Fresh-faced, maybe 20, wearing a deputy's badge. "Can I help you?" "Marshal Thompson asked me to give you this." The deputy handed over a sealed envelope. "Came in this morning." Jasper opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in official stamps and signatures. It was a pardon, full and complete, for any crimes Jasper may have committed during the war or after. "The marshal says you earned it," the deputy said. "Says the country owes you a debt." Jasper stared at the paper, at the words that meant his past was finally, truly behind him. "Tell the marshal I said thank you," he said finally. The deputy nodded and walked away. Clara appeared beside him a moment later. "Good news?" He showed her the pardon. She read it twice, then looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "It's over," she said. "Really over. Yeah." He folded the paper and tucked it into his pocket. "I guess it is. How does it feel?" Jasper thought about it, about the weight he had carried for 6 years, about the guilt and the shame and the endless gnawing regret. "Lighter," he said finally. "It feels lighter." Clara took his hand, squeezed it tight. "Good," she said. "That's good." They stood there in the middle of the street, two people who had found each other against all odds. Two people who had chosen love over hatred, hope over despair. Two people who had finally found their way home, 1 year later. The wedding was small. Just family and a few close friends gathered on the porch of the Thornton homestead, watching as Clara Weston became Clara Mallister. Sam stood beside Jasper as his best man. The boy was 15 now, tall and strong, with his father's broad shoulders and his mother's quick mind. He was apprenticing with the town blacksmith, learning to build instead of destroy. Ellie was the flower girl. She walked down the aisle in a white dress that Clara had sewn herself, scattering petals from a basket woven by her own hands. She still didn't speak often, but when she did, her words carried weight. The preacher read the vows. Jasper and Clara exchanged rings, and when he kissed his bride, a cheer went up from the small crowd. It was perfect. Afterward, there was food and music and dancing. Sam played his harmonica while Ellie twirled in circles with her rag doll. The sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold. Jasper found a quiet moment on the porch, looking out over the land that had become his home. Clara appeared beside him. "Hiding from your own wedding?" "Just taking a moment." He put his arm around her. "It's been quite a year. That's an understatement." She leaned into him, her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever think about them?" she asked. "Thomas, Crane, everything that happened, every day." Jasper's voice was soft, but it doesn't hurt the way it used to. "What changed?" He looked at her, at Sam and Ellie dancing in the lamplight, at the life they had built from the ashes of the old. "I stopped running," he said. "Finally stopped running from my past. Started living in the present. And what about the future?" Jasper smiled. "The future," he said, "looks pretty good from here." They stood in silence for a while, watching their children play. Then Sam called out from the yard, "Mr. Mallister, Ma, come dance with us." Jasper laughed. "I'm not much of a dancer, neither am I," Clara said. "But we're doing it anyway." She pulled him off the porch and into the yard. Sam grabbed Ellie's hands, and the four of them spun in circles under the stars, laughing and stumbling and holding on to each other. It was ridiculous. It was undignified. It was absolutely perfect. Later that night, after the guests had gone home and the children were asleep, Jasper sat on the porch one last time. Clara joined him, wrapping a blanket around both their shoulders. "Cold," she said. "A little." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. "Jasper," Clara said finally. "Yeah?" "I've been thinking." "About what?" "About everything. About how we got here, about all the pain and suffering and loss." She paused. "Do you think it was worth it?" Jasper considered the question. Thought about Thomas Weston, dying under a Georgia oak. About the 6 years of guilt and isolation that followed. About the night a bleeding boy had stumbled onto his porch and changed everything. "I don't know," he said honestly. "A lot of good people died to get us here. Thomas, Sheriff Whitmore, all the others. But, he looked at her. "If none of it had happened, I never would have met you. Never would have found Sam and Ellie. Never would have learned what it means to have a family. So, it was worth it?" "I think," Jasper said slowly, "that the past is the past. We can't change it. Can't undo the things that were done. All we can do is move forward and try to make the future better than what came before." Clara nodded. "I think Thomas would have liked you to be happy." "You think so?" "I know so." She took his hand. "He loved you like a brother. He would have wanted you to live." Jasper thought about his old friend, about the smile on his face in Ellie's drawing, about the peace he had found in his final moments. "Maybe you're right," he said. "I usually am." He laughed. A real laugh, full and free. The kind of laugh he had thought he'd forgotten how to make. "I love you, Clara Mallister." "I love you too, Jasper Mallister." They kissed under the stars. And for a moment, everything was perfect. The next morning, Jasper woke early. He slipped out of bed without waking Clara and went to check on the children. Sam was still asleep, snoring softly, his harmonica clutched in one hand. Ellie was awake, sitting by the window, drawing by the first light of dawn. "Couldn't sleep?" Jasper asked softly. Ellie shook her head. "What are you drawing?" She held up the cloth. It was the four of them, Jasper, Clara, Sam, and Ellie, standing on the porch of their home, watching the sunset, smiling. "It's beautiful," Jasper said. "It's us," Ellie replied. Her voice was soft but clear. "Our family." "Yeah." Jasper felt his throat tighten. "Our family." Ellie went back to her drawing. Jasper watched her for a moment, marveling at the miracle of her existence, at the strength and resilience of children. at the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. Then he went outside to start the morning chores. The sun was rising over the mountains. The creek was singing its eternal song. And somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out, soaring on the first warm currents of the day. Jasper Mallister stood on his porch and watched the world wake up. He thought about everything he had lost, everything he had gained, everything he had become. And he smiled. Because somewhere along the way, between the blood and the fire and the tears, he had found something he never expected. He had found home. He had found family. He had found love. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The door opened behind him. Clara appeared, coffee cup in hand, her hair tousled from sleep. "Beautiful morning," she said. "Yeah." Jasper put his arm around her. "It really is." They stood together watching the sun rise, and the story of Jasper Mallister, the man who had hidden from the world, came to an end. But the story of Jasper Mallister, the man who had found his way home, was just beginning. And that, as they say, made all the difference. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.